All right, good morning. So we're discussing the different opinions of the Tefillin of Rashi and Rabeinu Tam. And like we discussed last week, here you have Rashi who says everything goes in the order of the way it is written in the Torah. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Rabeinu Tam has the opinion that it goes 1, 2, and then 4, 3. There's two ways in the Poskim. There's two simonim given to two things to help remember the order of Rabeinu Tam. Number one is that the two of the parashas have a shin in them. The first parasha is Kadesh, which ends with the shin, and the third parasha is Shema, which starts with the shin. And those two are the ones that are found on the exterior, adjacent to the shins that are on the bulging out of the side of the tefillin. That's one, and another one, which is perhaps more common, is Habayos Ba'emtza. Two of the four paragraphs of the Tefillin start with the words V'hoya ki Yaviyacha, and V'hoya im Shemaya, from Shemaya, Parshas Boy and Parshas Ekev. And those two, V'hoya and V'hoya, according to Rabeinu Tam, are Ba'emtza in the middle, versus according to Rashi, where the two V'hoyas are number 2 and number 4. Now, as we discussed last week, these opinions of the Tefillin are not unique to Rashi and Rabeinu Tam. They are commonly known as Rashi and Rabeinu Tam, but they are not unique to them. Just to show some of the major players, if you will, on either side of it, we have, in accordance with Rashi, we have also the Rambam, we have the Rashba, Rabbeinu Yoina, the Ramban, the Sefer HaChinuch, and many others, but those are perhaps the most prominent Rishonim who go with that side. And then you have on the other side, together with Rabeinu Tam, you have Rabbeinu Hananel, a very prominent pasuk called Dvar of Divrei Kabbalah. It says everything that he says has a super degree of authority. Reb Sadi Goin, even from before the Rishonim, we discussed last week, the Goinim were those who headed the yeshivas in Bavel immediately after the closing of the Gemara, so perhaps even a few hundred years before Rabeinu Tam. Reb Shira Goin, another one of the Goinim, the Yereim, Rabbeinu Peretz, etc. Okay, so that you have just a list of Rishonim on both sides of the table. Now, one of the things that we find with regards to Rabeinu Tam's Tefillin specifically is that even though the halacha follows Rashi, and therefore that's the main Tefillin, that's the one we make a bracha on, etc., Rabeinu Tam isn't just another opinion. Just to illustrate this point, the Vilna Gaon is said to have only worn Rashi Tefillin. And the reason being, what is explained, what he attributed to him is that he said that if I were to want to fulfill all the opinions of wearing tefillin, I would have to wear 64 pairs of tefillin. And he made the cheshbon that there's 64 different opinions, because first of all, there's the opinions of Rashi and Rabeinu Tam in the order. There's also the opinion of the Ravid, which we discussed last week. We'll review it again soon. Perhaps also the Moshe Rabbi, like we'll see. Then there's also different opinions as to, do you place the parashias in the tefillin vertically, which is the way we do it, or horizontally? Then there's another machlokes as to which side of the parchment do you write it on? Do you write it on the front side or the back side of the parchment? So, I mean, I don't know the whole cheshbon, but basically the Vilna Gaon made the cheshbon was that if you want to do all the opinions, you're going to be wearing 64 pairs of tefillin a day. And so he said, I'm only going to put in Rashi. However, the big caveat to the Vilna Gaon is, to the Vilna Gaon's approach is that the Vilna Gaon was makbid to wear tefillin the entire day. The original and quote ideal way of fulfilling the mitzvah is to put on the tefillin every day. To wear the tefillin the whole day. So the Vilna Gaon was careful to wear the tefillin the whole day. So if he were going to wear two, even if you get it 64, even if you're going to wear the two tefillin, so for that amount of time that he was wearing Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, he would be missing the opportunity of wearing Rashi Tefillin, which is the primary one, which he did the whole day. So that was his cheshbon. It's interesting that the Vilna Gaon was a big mekubal, and we'll see later that al pi Kabbalah, it is important to wear both pairs of tefillin, but yet that was the Vilna Gaon's approach. Um, yeah. Now, so nevertheless, despite there being numerous different opinions, and like in many areas of halacha, we have different opinions, and then we pass in like one opinion, and that's it. That remains the halacha. We don't do 100 different opinions of when there's different opinions of mezuzah. Nobody has 7 mezuzahs on their doorpost. We have different types of tzitzis, and with the exception of maybe one, Chaim Pinchas Steinberg was famous for this, but most people wear one pair of tzitzis. You choose your minhag, you choose your opinion, you have your posuk that you follow, and that's it. Whereas when it comes to Rashi and Rabeinu Tam, we see already very early on that these that it's not just 2 random opinions. Actually, there's a lot more to it. So let me show you some of the sources. So the first source I'm going to show you is the Migdal Oiz. Now, what's interesting, let's actually do this one first. Shalas Utshuvas Min HaShamayim. We mentioned this last week. We mentioned him a few times in the past. He was one of the Balei HaTosfos who asked questions from heaven in a dream, and he often received answers, and they are recorded in the responsa called Shalas Utshuvas Min HaShamayim, responsa from heaven. And in the Siman Gimel of this Sefer, he says there are different customs, different opinions as to how to put on tefillin, and the ones who are of opinion A, he doesn't. I don't think he calls them Rashi and Rabeinu Tam. He says Kesidron or Havayis B'Emtza, which right. But he's referring to those 2 opinions which we know as Rashi and Rabeinu Tam. And who's the opinion? Who's the halacha like? And Heshivu, they answered him. Both of them are the words of the living God. And as is there is a machlekes down here, so too is there a machlekes l'mayla. Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, Hashem says that Havayis B'Emtza. So Hashem is in accordance with Rabeinu Tam. V'chol Pamal Yeshal Mayla, but the supernal yeshiva, I think the etymology of the word Pamalia is actually the same as the English word family. But anyway, the yeshiva Shal Mayla, they hold Havayis Kesidron. That's like the opinion of Rashi. Now, this notion of there being a machlokes between Hashem and the Yeshiva Shamayla, whatever it means, is not something that was invented over here. Already the Gemara talks about a machlokes it's a Gemara above Mitzvah Daf Pevav Medalef concerning Tsaras, which we just concluded learning in the 3 parak a day cycle of Rambam, where there is a certain scenario where the white stain, or if you will, of the Tsaras appeared on the person's body before the white hairs, and if it's a suffix, Hashem says it's okay, and the Yeshiva Shalmayla, there it says Masifta Durakia. Here it says Pamali Shamayla, there it says Masifta Durakia, say that it is Tomei. So this is a very often quoted important source for the importance of wearing Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, or for the value of Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, even though the halacha is in accordance with Rashi. There's also a tshuva, a response from the Radvaz, who he said he was asked as follows. Somebody asked me, he has Rabeinu Tam's tefillin and he wants to change them into being Rashi tefillin. Is there any problem with doing so? We discussed on last Sunday, we spoke about Ma'ilin B'Kodesh Lo Meridin, that you're not allowed to take the strap of the head tefillin and change them to the hand tefillin, because there is a greater degree of sanctity in the head tefillin. So here, somebody was asking, Rabeinu Tam that's not the halacha. Rashi is the halacha. So, is there any problem with taking my Rashi tefillin my Rabeinu Tam tefillin and changing them into the Rashi tefillin? It might be a good idea here to point out the parshas of the tefillin must be written, like Rabbi Rabin described, they must be written in order. So you have to write them in the order that they appear in the Torah. So even according to Rabeinu Tam, where the placement into the head tefillin is 1, 2, 4, 3, when you write them 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is relevant when you're writing the hand tefillin. The head tefillin are 4 separate scrolls. So you write 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you place them 1, 2, 4, 3. But the hand tefillin, which is one long scroll, so the way you write Rabeinu Tam's tefillin is you write 1, 2, then you leave a blank space for 4. Then you write 3, and then you go back to write 4. Right? If the Sofer would write Rabeinu Tam's tefillin on the hand tefillin as they appear, 1, 2, 4, 3, they would not be kosher tefillin. Anyway, so somebody asked the Radvaz, may he take the tefillin of Rabeinu Tam and change them, or perhaps even upgrade them, if you will, to Rashi tefillin, or is this consider? It doesn't say if he's talking only about the boxes, or perhaps even the scroll and the head scrolls themselves, which you could in theory change around, so the person who was communicating with the Radvaz suggested that it should be forbidden, because if you're not allowed to take something from tefillin and downgrade them to not be tefillin. So according to Rabeinu Tam, if I take the Rabeinu Tam and according to Rashi it's an upgrade, but according to Rabeinu Tam it's a downgrade. So that would be disrespectful to Rabeinu. According to Rabeinu Tam, that would be disrespectful to the tefillin to change them from Rabeinu Tam to Rashi. So Radvaz says that I answered him that it's okay, that because the primary halacha follows Rashi, so then it's okay. However, he says that night I was shown in a dream that I did not paskin correctly, and I changed my mind, and I realized that indeed to change tefillin from Rabeinu Tam to Rashi would be a disrespectful to all the great Gaonim who were on the side of Rabeinu Tam, and therefore I say that it's forbidden to do so. It's forbidden to do so. Another very important source into the importance of Rabeinu Tam is the Migdalois. The Migdalois is perhaps much more of a mainstream sefer than Shalosh Asuas Min HaShamayim, than a response from heaven. The Migdalois, here it's Reb Shem Tov ben Avraham Goyen from the 13th century, and in Spain. And the Migdalois is one of the classic commentaries onto the Rambam. In many editions of the Rambam, it's printed on the page on the bottom. It's not some obscure sefer about response in dreams. And in his discussion of the order of the parshas on with the Rambam, like we said before, the Rambam holds like Rashi, so he discusses it over there, and he says like this: I say that the Rambam describes the order of the tefillin as he received from his teachers, the Ritzbe Imges and the Rif and the Rimegash, Rashi, etc. But the truth is also that Rabeinu Tam and others who accord with the opinion of Rabeinu Haigain, which we'll see soon, that's a discussion into its own right. And he says, says the Migdalois that it's such a great machlokus that already the Bali HaTosfos, this is not some minhag that was developed now, that already the Bali HaTosfos, the colleagues of Rabeinu Tam, agreed that it is necessary to fulfill both opinions. Because there's room in the head and the arm to put on two tefillin simultaneously. So the Migdalois is going with the opinion, which till today some Sephardim do, that they wear not Rabeinu Tam after davening, but they wear Rashi Rabeinu Tam simultaneously with very small tefillin. And then he adds, we received uniquely or personally that from heaven they have demonstrated and they have said that just like there is this ongoing machlokes down here in this world, so too is there a machlokes in heaven. And many other Sfarim which were not able to be published have already been, it doesn't say why, if this is some spiritual thing or, or just whatever obstacles there were. And he says, listen, and this is a very important line. He says, we have already found from the Kadmonim, from earlier generations, that they found by the grave of Yechezkel Hanavi, in the earliest known archeological diggings, in the grave of Yechezkel Hanavi, they found tefillin that were hidden and they've checked them and found them to be in this accordance with the order of the Rambam, which is the accordance of the order of Rashi. Now, it's interesting, soon we'll see about other archaeological findings, but it's brought down somewhere that, they bring from Rabbi Yosef Shol Nathanson. Rabbi Yosef Shol Nathanson was the Rav of Lemberg, and he was not a Chassid, but he was a very prominent pesach in his time, and he has some tradition that Rashi tefillin are appropriate in Chutz La'aretz and Rabeinu Tam tefillin are appropriate in Eretz Yisrael, which I don't know if he himself says or others say that would explain why they found Rashi tefillin by the grave of Yechezkel Hanavi, because Yechezkel Hanavi was primarily in Bavel, in the diaspora. Okay, now one of the very interesting things about this whole machlokes is that that Rav Hai Goin, his opinion is going to be very important because he is a much earlier authority than the Rashi, than Rambam, Rabeinu Tam, than anyone. He was one of the Goinim, so he was much closer to the time of the Talmud. So, what did Rav Hai Goin himself hold? Now, everybody seems to pull the Rav Hai Goin in their direction. So here we see that the Migdalois attributed Rav Hai Goin to be in accordance with Rabeinu Tam. Let's see. So there was a place called, let's get this out of the way. Okay, so Rav Hai Goin served as the Goin of the Talmudic Academy in Pumbedisa during the early 11th century. He was born in the year 939 and died in the year, I have to move this thing to see, 1038. Okay, now, so there was a place in the south of France. One second, I'm gonna get the slideshow to work here.
Are people buried wearing tefillin?
No, they weren't. No, not at all. They found tefillin that are no longer fit for use, are put in geniza, are put in shemus. What do you do with shemus? You bury it. So it was buried near the I don't know for sure that it means that those were the tefillin that belonged to Yechezkel Hanavi, but perhaps it does mean that it was from his time period. Anyway, okay, so here you have the map. Lunel, Chachmei Lunel, also sometimes called Chachmei Provinza, was an area in the south of France which was home to many of the great sages of the 12th and 13th century. Now there is a correspondence between the Chachmei Lunel and the Rambam. They used these type of by airmail envelopes, and for the sake of full disclosure, I'll say that amongst contemporary historians, there is some, sorry, there is some discussion as to whether or not these correspondences are, some contemporary historians claim that they're a forgery, that they're not true. However, even amongst contemporary historians, there are many who are of the strong opinion that they are true, and certainly the early poskim, even in the generation immediately following the Rambam, accepted these to be legitimate letters of the Rambam and of the Chachmei Lunel. So, in the Chachmei Lunel wrote to the sages from France over there, wrote to the Rambam after the Rambam Sefer was published, where the Rambam paskins that the order of the Tefillin is like Rashi, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they wrote a letter to the Rambam, and they wrote, Rabeinu, teach us, our master, this that you have written in the 3rd chapter, that you put in the Tefillin in that order, like of Rashi, they says, we, your students, have received from our teachers that they received from the Goinim. Rabeinu Hai Berosham, they received from Rabeinu Hai Goin himself, that you need to make the tefillin in the order of Rabeinu Tam. So how could you say, Rambam, that you have to put the tefillin like the order? Again, I'll just use Rashi and Rabeinu Tam because that's the terms we're familiar with. How could you say, Rambam, that you have to put on tefillin like Rashi? Rabeinu Hai Goin, he said that you have to put on tefillin like Rabeinu Tam. So the Rambam wrote back to them, and he says like this. Fascinating stuff. He says, this order of the tefillin that you are claiming to put them like Rabeinu Tam, he says, the tefillin that I had in the West were like that. When the Rambam says West, he means Spain, because that's where he lived in Egypt and in Israel, and he came from Spain. So when I lived in Spain, I had tefillin like Rabeinu Tam. The Rambam, right? Again, the Rambam has just ruled in his Yad HaChazaka that if you change the order of the tefillin the way Rashi says it, it's not kosher. If you change the order, it's not kosher. Says the Rambam, I myself, in my youth in Spain, used to wear tefillin like Rabeinu Tam. And he says, so to some very prominent person, Moshe from Kurtova, who wrote chibur. He wrote a compilation of the laws of Tefillin. It says here that his name was Ramoshe by Maimon. Nowadays they say that's a mistake. Whatever it was, there was a Ramoshe who was an important authority over there. And he says it was that book on the laws of Tefillin written by this Ramoshe in Cordoba, which made me mistake, which misled me and misled all of the people in Spain before me, and even Rabbi Yitzchak, which refers to the Rif, also of blessed memory, he also followed that opinion of Ramoshe to make the Tefillin of Rabeinu Tam. And he says there was also somebody by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Kelly who also did like Rabeinu Tam. However, many disagree with this, and all of the people of the East, meaning all the people in Israel and all the people of the East, and even including all the people in Eretz Yisrael, disagree with this, and they say that the trustworthy or reliable sages opened the Tefillin of Rav Hai, and they were written according to the order that I said it, that the Rambam says, like Rashi. And Moshe Deri himself, when he came from Spain to Israel, he also had tefillin like the people of your place, like Rabeinu Tam. And when he came to Eretz Yisrael, we showed him the words of the earlier Go'anim, and he discarded his tefillin and he changed them to be according to the order of Rashi. So what's fascinating about this is that we have a person by the name of Ramoshe, some from Cordoba, who somehow misled all the people in Spain to be wearing tefillin like Rabeinu Tam, but in the East and Eretz Yisrael and in Mitzrayim, it was demonstrated convincingly that actually Rashi is the correct order of the tefillin, and people who came from the West, from Spain to Eretz Yisrael actually changed. So that's one fascinating thing. The other fascinating thing is that we have, like we say, machlokes and mitzias. The Chachmei Lunil, they said that Rabeinu Hai told them to wear tefillin like Rabeinu Tam, and the Rambam is telling them that actually some very trustworthy sages opened the tefillin of Rav Hai Goyen, and they were like Rashi. So, I mean, was Rav Hai wearing tefillin like Rashi, or was he wearing tefillin like Rabeinu Tam? So, whoops. Now, in case that's not enough, last week we learned the opinion of the Ravid, and the Ravid is the same as Rabeinu Tam, but backwards, right? Rabeinu Tam says the right is the person standing opposite me. The Ravid says the right is my own right. So, if you will, Rabeinu Tam is 1, 2, 4, 3, and Ravid is 3, 4, 2, 1. And the Ravid starts off by saying, Rabeinu Hai Zaleinu Elam Kein Novayis K'Vayim Tzakadosh Mimin Hamaniach. So the Ravid attributes his opinion also to Rabeinu Hai. So we have three opinions as to the order of the tefillin. We spoke about the Shimoshe Rabbah last week, which is the fourth opinion, which we'll get to soon. But at least three of the opinions are all attributing their opinion according to Rabeinu Tam, to Rav Hai Goyen. Now, one of the, like we discussed last time, one of the very important sources which elaborate on this whole issue at great length is the Tshuva of Rama Mipano, Menachem Azari Mipano. We spoke about him last week from Italy. So he has a very lengthy Tshuva about this. And here's one section where he says it is very probable to me that Rabeinu Hai also had the same suffix, the same doubt as to what the correct way to place the tefillin is. Rabeinu Hai had the same doubt, and therefore he had tefillin like all of the opinions. And because all of them are legitimate ways of explaining the Gemara. And therefore, different people opened his tefillin and testified to different findings because they were both true. One person opened his Rashi tefillin, and this is before Rashi and Rabeinu Tam were born. But one person opened his Rashi tefillin, and one person opened his Rabeinu Tam tefillin. And they both testified the truth, that they opened his tefillin, and they found it in that, according to that opinion. Alternatively, he said it could be that he changed his mind, that in his youth he wore it like one way, like the Rambam says that he changed. So in his youth he did one way, and in his elderly years he did another way. Anyway, so that's what the Ramam Pano says about Rabeinu Hai. Now we saw already before that the Migdal Oz also says that the Bali HaTosfos already agreed that everybody should wear 2 pairs of tefillin. Now, something that we touched upon briefly last week was, how does such machlokas come to be? Right? How does such machlokas come to be? It's so one example we spoke of last week was how could it be that they didn't? There's a suffix in the Gemara what to do about Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos. Are you allowed to bring the Korban Pesach when it falls on Shabbos? Which is something that there's a maximum of I think 14 or 20 years. That could be obviously people would remember. Another famous suffix which the poskim struggle with is blowing shofar. We know that the Torah says you have to blow tkiya and then a trua and then a tkiya. But what does trua mean? Does trua mean what we call trua? What does the Torah mean when it says trua? It doesn't mean what we mean when we say trua, which is tu 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 tu, or does it mean what we say shvarim that we do tu tu tu? So because of this doubt, Rabbi Vohu, the Gemara says that Rabbi Vohu instituted that we should do both, which is how we get to the custom that we blow shofar today. So there also the poskim grapple with this. How is it possible not to remember from year to year how you blow shofar? How does such a thing come to be? Now the question of Rashi Tefillin is even more perplexing than a suffix in how to blow shofar, because Rabeinu Tam is not just your memory. The order of the parasha is not just your memory. It's an actual tangible physical object that you could open up and check what's going on inside. And indeed, for many years, one of the strong quote proofs for the opinion of Rashi was, like we said before, that at the grave of Yechezkel they found tefillin in accordance with the opinion of Rashi. However, more recently, and there we go. It says this is quoting from Rabbi Margolius's notes to the response from heaven, and he says that recently it was found in caves in Eretz Yisrael, very old, from the time of Bayis Sheni, and around that time, that they were found tefillin that belonged to the soldiers of Bar Kokhba, from the Bar Kokhba revolt, and over there the parachutes were found in the order of Rabeinu Tam. Now, I don't know, Yechezkel HaNavi was between the destruction of the first and second temples. This is Bar Kokhba was after the second temple. I don't know. Yeah, so it's later than Yechezkel HaNavi, but what's certainly true is that we find old tefillin in the accordance with Rabeinu Tam many centuries before Rabeinu Tam came about. He also brings here that Rabbeinu Hai Gaon wore 2 pairs of tefillin, and he quotes here Rabbeinu Hai's commentary to Mishnayos Kalim. Now I looked it up. Now I'm not sure why Rabbeinu Margolius, we've spoken about him a number of times, was an absolute genius, and I'm not sure what his reference, what he wants to bring proof from there. But it's just interesting to note that over there it's talking about tefillin parenthetically, and Rabbeinu Hai says that you have the 4 paragraphs of tefillin, and he says them in an order that doesn't fit any of the opinions. Now he's not telling you how to make tefillin; he just says there are 4 paragraphs in the tefillin, and he says 3, 4, 1, 2. So I'm not sure why Rabbi Margolius is quoting that here. If maybe he's trying to say that he deliberately put them out of order so that you shouldn't be able to infer that he holds one way or the other because he held both. I'm not sure, but either way, we find archaeological evidence for both opinions. Very ancient archaeological evidence. Now, the truth is that already there's a machlokes between the Bach and the Drisha whether you can bring any proof from archaeological findings of tefillin, because whichever tefillin you hold are kosher, if you find the other one in buried, you could say, well, that's why they were buried, because they weren't kosher, because they were found in the wrong order. So that's already, you can go back about that, I don't know, I'm not sure. Now, what's interesting to note, however, is that even though, so the Migdalois himself, who we spoke before, that the Migdalois says that this machlokes Rabeinu Tam and Rashi is something which is, chayvek olam, and already in heaven. This is the sort of fundamental unanswerable question, because it's a question at all levels and all realms of reality. the worlds, etc. The same Migdalois, when he addresses the question about shofar, how could it be that there became a doubt with the shofar, which the Rambam explicitly says that because of the many years of exile, there became a doubt as to what the real way to blow shofar is. The Migdalois on the Rambam doesn't like that, and he quotes Rav Haigoin, the same Rav Haigoin who was saying perhaps he himself wore Rashi and Ben Atam Tefillin because of a doubt, ostensibly. When it came to shofar, Rabeinu Hai rejects the notion that there was any doubt, and Rabeinu Hai says that when it comes to shofar, that both of them are legitimate. There are two legitimate approaches to teruah. One is tu, one is tu, what we call shvarim and teruah. So if they're both legitimate, what was Rabbi doing in instituting that we do both? So basically, it's a lengthy piece, but the upshot of Rabeinu Hai's approach over there is that Rabbi Vo didn't want it to appear, different communities had different customs and they came together and he was doing this and he was doing this. It didn't look good for the Jews that different people were doing different things, and he wanted to create uniformity. And so he created, let's make this uniform, we'll do both, and then everybody will be happy, and that's it, we'll do both. But Rabeinu Hai rejects the notion, and the Migdalois quotes Rabeinu Hai, and he accepts it so strongly that he even wants to suggest that the Rambam explicitly writes that because of the length of the years of Golus, we forgot how to do, became about a doubt how to do teruah. And the Migdalois is so not accepting of that possibility that it's possible to forget how to do teruah that he tries to insert the opinion of Rabeinu Hai into the Rambam. Right? And that same Migdalois and Rabeinu Hai, the Migdalois explicitly says that you should wear 2 pairs of tefillin. And Rabeinu Hai doesn't say it explicitly, but we see that many great Jewish writers attribute this to Rabeinu Hai, that he wore 2 pairs of tefillin, or possibly even 3 pairs if you accept the Ravid's approach, right? And so...
He wore them at the same time?
Either at the same time or one after each other.
3 boxes on his arm, or they're 3 tefillin in the same box? No,
not in the same box. It would be 3 separate tefillins, but either he wore them 2 at a time, or perhaps even 3 at a time, or like we do, we take off Rashi and we put it on our arms, right? You can't have more than 4 in the same box. That would be not valid according to any opinion. Okay, so last week we mentioned the Rebbe's novel idea that this machloikus goes back all the way to Moshe Rabeinu. That Moshe Rabeinu came and said, you have to put on tefillin. By the way, there's another whole discussion on when did the mitzvah of tefillin started, because the mitzvah of tefillin, the word tefis means 4. So tefillin is by definition 4 paragraphs, but some of those paragraphs were only given in Deuteronomy right before they entered Israel. So was there even the notion of wearing tefillin in the desert, or did that mitzvah only start once they went into Israel? But be that as it may, the Rebbe is suggesting that the machloikus as to the order of the tefillin goes back all the way to then, and from that level, if Moshe doesn't receive it explicitly from God, his opinion is equally as legitimate as anybody else's opinion, as long as you are using the methodology, the rules that Torah provides. Torah provides, like we say, Yud Gimel Midas, the 13 attributes with which we apply the laws of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu can apply them, Yehoshua ben Nun can apply them, anybody else can apply them. Not the same as the Rebbe's idea, but similar. We find that Rabbi Magdalius and other great people here suggesting that Moshe Rabbeinu told them to do both. That Moshe Rabbeinu told them what's the main opinion. He said, this is how you have to do it. But there's also value, like we see the Migdaloi saying that this is the machloikus already in heaven. So Moshe Rabbeinu told them exactly that. Moshe Rabbeinu told them, look, it's a machloikus in heaven, and therefore this is the main way to do it. But I don't know if Moshe Rabbeinu told this to everybody, or he only told it to the select few who were more holy or more righteous, or whatever the criteria was. That it's also good to do this, to do both approaches. Now, then what happens is over the years, there becomes different opinions as to which one is the primary one. If you suggest that both orders of the tefillin were in existence way back from Moshe Rabbeinu, then it's very easy to understand how there could become a machloikus later on as to which one of the two is the primary and which one is the one that you do just to be extra better. Now, another interesting thing to note is that even though from a halachic perspective, or from, if you will, from a nigla perspective, this boils down to a machloikus as to how to read the pshat in the Gemara, and we're even suggesting that this machloikus is before the pshat in the Gemara, the machloikus is already way back. But essentially, it's a machloikus. It's this one or that one. What Rabbi Margolis, or what some here are suggesting, is that this goes way back to Moshe Rabeinu. What you're suggesting is that actually they're both legitimate. And indeed, al pi Kabbalah, we find in the Zohar it says that it explains what the Kabbalistic significance of both of the different opinions. And then it says that some people wear two tefillin out of a place of doubt, but they don't know that really it's not a doubt, it's because both are necessary. And it's interesting to note that the Zohar says a similar thing with regards to blowing shofar, that the differences between shvarim and trua, I mean, now I think it's nobody thinks of blowing shofar with Rabeinu Tam. At the end of the day, we make a bracha on Rashi, we don't make a bracha on Rabeinu Tam. Rashi is the primary one. When it comes to shofar, nobody says that one is more primary than the other. We have to blow shofar. It's the fun of the Gemara that you have to do shvarim and trua. But the Zohar says that it's not the way the Gemara presents it. It's like it's a doubt. We don't know which is the shvarim and which is the thing. But according to the Zohar, both with regards to the question of Rashi versus Rabeinu Tam Tefillin and with regards of shvarim versus trua, the al pi Kabbalah, they both have significance and they are both, quote, necessary. I'm sorry, this idea that Moshe Rabeinu himself told them the both opinions is attributed here to Rabbi Viat Sar Shalom. I don't know who that is, but that's who he attributes it to. Okay. Now, last week we discussed the opinion of the Shemushi Rabbah, which is basically the same as Rashi, but again, the perspective of right being my own perspective, not that other one next to me, opposite me. So according to Rashi, we would say it's 1, 2, 3, 4. According to Shemushi Rabbah, it's 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, the truth is that throughout the generations, the Shemushi Rabbah was not considered to be an additional opinion. And there are numerous references to this, that any place where you see anybody talking about the tefillin of Shemushi Rabbah, they were referring to the size. If you remember, we discussed last week that the Shemushi Rabbah held that the tefillin have to be bigger, to what we call 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters. People talking about the Shemushi Rabbah are taught in earlier generations are talking about the size of the tefillin, not of the order of the parashas. So there are 3 opinions of the order of the parashas that are explicit in the Rishonim. We have Rashi, and like we said before, the Rambam and numerous others that go on that opinion. Rabeinu Tam and numerous that go on that opinion. And then we have the Shittas Yachid, the Ravid, who is the only one who says, like Rabeinu Tam, but backwards. But that's explicit in the Ravid. He says that explicitly, you go from your Yamin HaManiach, from my own right side. The Shemushi Rabbah, which is like Rashi, but my own right side, is not explicit. In the Shemushi Rabbah itself, the way it's quoted in the Rosh that we saw last week, there are different opinions how to read it, and we saw already in the Rosh himself, he brings from the Rav of Barcelona that there's a typo in there, perhaps even 2 typos in there. So there's no clear reference that Shemushi Rabbah is a 4th opinion in earlier generations. The first one to do so is, like we spoke last week, of the Ramah Mipano and his very long Teshuvah, and he goes through the words of the Rosh, up and back. He demonstrates there's much literature, contemporary even on this, to demonstrate to prove the opinion that Rabbi Shemushi Rabbah is a 4th opinion. And he says as follows: I will not be silent, but I will not refrain from testifying that which has testified before me the very professional and trustworthy scribe, who we rely on in all matters of fixing tefillin and in all matters of kedusha, sefer Torah, mezuzah. That many years ago he opened very, very old tefillin to check them, and he found them. The parashas were placed in the order of the Shemushi Rabbah. In other words, right, what we're calling 4, 3, 2, 1. And this Sofer told me that he disqualified them because he says, there's no such opinion. This is not a kosher pair of tefillin. And he said, and the Ramam Pano says, I myself also saw after many years that I found very old, worn-out tefillin in Genizas and in buried or whatever. Not 1, not 2, but many tefillin whose parashas were ordered in this opinion of Rav Moshe Rabba 4321. And therefore, I have established that this is indeed this is indeed a fourth opinion, that the tefillin have to be in that way. Now, it's interesting that he says that the Sefer disqualified them because it was no good, because it was 4321 instead of 1234. Elsewhere in this same tshuva, the Ramah Mipano argues that if you put on tefillin backwards, it's kosher. So even though we do Rashi and Rabeinu Tam tefillin, when we do Rashi, we're also b'di'eved fulfilling the obligation according to Moshe Rabba, because even if you hold it's supposed to be 4321, if you do 1234, it's kosher b'di'eved, and even if you hold it's supposed to be 1243, if you do 4321, it's also good, right? If it's just backwards, it's okay b'di'eved. Anyway, so this is the Moshe Rabba's opinion, and the way the Ramah Pano is, and indeed in later generations, and certainly amongst the Chabad Rebbeim, it is the Tzemach Tzedek, the children of the Tzemach Tzedek testified that he wore the 4 pairs of tefillin. Again, the hand one is the same. It's just the head one that's flipped around. And it was accepted that amongst many Gedolei Yisrael, including amongst the Rabbeim of Chabad, that the Moshe Rabba constitutes a fourth opinion as to the order of tefillin. Okay, let's just look at the halacha l'maisa. This is quoting from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Concerning the order of these passages, there is an ancient difference of opinion amongst the Go'enim. You see, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say amongst Rashi and Rabeinu Tam, which is the Rishonim. This is the Alter Rebbe himself attributes it to the Go'enim of the early generations, and he says it was perpetuated by Rashi and Rabeinu Tam. Now, the slideshow shouldn't mislead you. There's a whole long Sif Gimel here, which I skipped. And then the Alter Rebbe rules as follows. The halacha rules according to Rashi and those who subscribe to his view. And indeed, universal practice follows his view. Nevertheless, Rabeinu Tam and those who subscribe to his view consider these tefillin as invalid according to scriptural law, and hence according to this view, a person who puts on only such tefillin, only Rashi's tefillin, will have lived his entire life without having fulfilled the mitzvah of tefillin. Every God-fearing person should therefore endeavor to discharge his obligation according to both views. Nevertheless, not everyone who desires to manifest spiritual distinction is permitted to do so. In a place where one's conduct will be seen by others, In a place where one's conduct will be seen by others, only a person whose pious conduct is commonly accepted and known should observe this practice. Since it's universal custom to only wear Rashi tefillin, if a person does not have such a reputation, undertakes a stringency, he appears to be pretentious unless he is similarly stringent in other areas. Now, I'll just add that these type of things, which is known in halacha as yuhara, as pretentious, holier than thou, are very subjective because it depends on the community and the times. If you live in a time where wearing Rabeinu Tam's tefillin has become more common, so then it's no longer pretentious to do so. We find a similar thing that in the writings of Rabbi Avraham ben Harambam, the son of the Rambam, he writes that it's yuhara and it's not recommended to wear tzitzis the whole day. If you're a holy person who does lots of mitzvahs all the time, then you can wear tzitzis all the time. But stam for a regular person to wear tzitzis all the time, that's not appropriate. Whereas nowadays, it's common practice for everybody to wear tzitzis the whole time, to the extent that Moshe Feinstein argues that nowadays one is actually obligated to wear tzitzis the entire time, which is not the discussion for now, but I'm just demonstrating precedence from the notion that what is considered yuhara can change over time. If you look in the footnote over here in this edition of Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it says like this: the mystical tradition of the Kabbalah distinguishes between the diverse spiritual influences that are elicited respectively by the tefillin of Rashi and Rabeinu Tam, and similarly of Moshe Rabba and Ravid. And since the influences elicited by the tefillin of Rashi are most essential, wearing such tefillin is an obligation for every Jew. And since those elicited by tefillin and Rabeinu Tam are also significant, the directive of the Alter Rebbe has long been widely observed that every Jew whose heart has been touched by the fear of Hashem should put on the tefillin of Rabeinu Tam. This directive does not apply to the tefillin of Moshe Rabba and Ravid because their subtle spiritual dynamics are attuned only to individuals with an exceptional degree of bodily purity. Okay. Now, so let's just finish off with a few minutes discussing the Rebbe's directives in this regard. So until the early or the mid-70s, the practice in Chabad was that once a person reached of age, usually it was around 18, could have been a little bit earlier or later, they would ask the Rebbe, is it time for me to start wearing Rabeinu Tam's tefillin? And usually the Rebbe would say yes, sometimes the Rebbe would say no, sometimes the Rebbe would say to wait a year, sometimes the Rebbe would stipulate it upon if you're careful to wear in Tfilas Ezra, you're careful to immerse in a mikvah after any time you have a seminal emission, and other similar certainly non-dogmatic approaches. And this is not unique to Chabad. Amongst most Chassidim who do wear Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, but a few of them wear it from their bar mitzvah. Usually it's from when they turn 18, or from when they get married, or from when a year after they get married. Different opinions. However, in Purim, this time of the year, Purim Toshin Lamed Vav, 1976, the Rebbe initiated the, I don't know if campaign is the right word, but the Rebbe initiated the idea that everyone should wear a Rabeinu Tam's tefillin from the age of bar mitzvah, or even from 2 months before the bar mitzvah when you start practicing. And the Rebbe essentially said two primary reasons. Now, we have to remember that the reasons that the Rebbe said didn't start in 1976. Those reasons would have been equally as applicable in 1975. So why the Rebbe sees it appropriate to initiate such a thing only in the 70s, whereas in the 60s, when he was asked if people should wear Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, he said, wait another year or whatever it is. That we don't know. That's the Rebbe. That's the Rebbe's the Rebbe. That's why he's the Rebbe, not me, right? but nevertheless, the reasons that the Rebbe presented were primarily two things. Number one, that because many, and specifically from the Kabbalistic school, say that it's absolutely integral for everyone to wear Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, so therefore we ought to do so. And second of all, that because the segulo, the accomplishment of tefillin is l'shabed ha'alev ha'moyach, to restrain our taivas, to restrain our indulgences and inclinations, etc., to harness them into the service of Hashem. So as the darkness and the distractions of this world, chachmas chitzonius, scientifically and other areas, become more compelling, so we need to add more light to combat that, and therefore adding more light in the area of Shabbat Alev HaMayach is with wearing a Rabeinu Tam's tefillin. And the Rebbe also quoted then from others for him that this time the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur that it's a custom to wear a Rabeinu Tam's tefillin after davening. Doesn't mean that wearing a Rabeinu Tam's tefillin is only a custom. Rabeinu Tam's tefillin is a must. The custom is to wear it after davening because there's an alternative custom to wear it during davening, like we mentioned before. There's Sfardim who wear 2 pairs of tefillin simultaneously. Anyway, this is something which the Rebbe pushed very strongly, that everyone should nowadays, it's necessary to combat the darkness that we face in the world this day. Nowadays, it's necessary for everyone to wear Rabeinu Tam's tefillin. Now, I'll finish off with an interesting story with the Rebbe and Moshe Feinstein. This is a truth of Moshe Feinstein that's published in Igros Moshe Chelik Vav, Erechaim Siman Tes. You can see it's dated Erev Shabbos Shkolim, so that's this week, in Tafshin Mem 1980, and it's written and addressed to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And basically, this is, I'm not sure what. It's interesting that you asked, because there's a story that I once heard that somebody was in Yechidus by the Rebbe, and he showed the Rebbe that he always carries around with him in his wallet a picture of the Rebbe and a picture of Moshe Feinstein. So the Rebbe smiled, and the Rebbe said, "Ich bin zufrieden haben them for Ashach, and I'm happy to have him as a neighbor." So, anyway, but Moshe Feinstein had a very close, the Rebbe and Moshe Feinstein had a close relationship in many ways, and actually in the introduction to Igros Moshe, volume 8 or 9, which was published posthumously, they write about how the Rebbe often referred Shilas to Moshe Feinstein. There's actually on Shem videos a number of things in that regard. Anyway, so I don't know exactly what happened in 1980, but it's something to do with an individual by the name of, I believe, Rabbi Spritzer, who had the connection to Moshe Feinstein, and he decided to speak to Moshe Feinstein based upon the Rebbe's enthusiasm and people wearing a Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, about Moshe Feinstein himself wearing a Rabeinu Tam's tefillin. And the long short story is like this. Moshe Feinstein tells that you can see here, when I was in Luban. Luban is the city in Russia where he lived before he came to America. He says, I used to have a Rabeinu Tam's tefillin, which were very muhuda, they were very beautiful, and I used to wear them every day after davening, but I stipulated that this would be b'li neder, so it's without a commitment. And he goes on to say that basically, when it comes to Rashi tefillin, so of course we try best to have the most beautiful Rashi tefillin possible, but if all you have is something which is not beautiful and has many, even if it has many problems with it, you're obligated to wear Rashi tefillin, so you do the best you got. Whereas Rabeinu Tam is a chumrah; it's not a must. So because it's merely a chumrah, I'm only going to do it if I have it the best way possible. That was his approach, and he says that he found very difficult to find the Rabeinu Tam tefillin according to his preference here in America. And he says, I think that he did one time in America have the Rabeinu Tam tefillin a little bit, and then they got ruined. They weren't. Don't forget, nowadays our tefillin are very sturdy because they're made from they're usually made from gassus, which means the hide of cows. In the olden days, they made tefillin from dakas, from the hide of sheep, and they were they didn't last. They lasted a few years, and then you had to change them. Anyway, and he goes on a very lengthy tshuva there's a very lengthy tshuva where he goes on to describe. It's a long pilpul where he has a number of things that he didn't like about that he couldn't find Rabeinu Tam tefillin in America to be written in accordance with his preference. He had a whole pilpul about Rabeinu Tam tefillin exactly what the space should be between V'hoyam Shemaya and Vayom and Shema. That was one thing. Another thing, it appears that he wanted the ksav of the Beis Yosef. So we know there's the ksav, the font of the Beis Yosef, and there's the font of the Arizal, and we also have the font of the Alter Rebbe. But primarily, the two common ksavim amongst Ashkenazic Jews are the Beis Yosef and the Arizal. Now, the Beis Yosef is what's used by the non-Chassidim. The Arizal is used by the Chassidim. Now, Moshe Feinstein himself, even though he writes explicitly that all of the different fonts are kosher, but it's important, he says, to be consistent. So Moshe Feinstein, as not being a chassid, have all my, Sefer Torah, mezuzahs, everything, my Rashi tefillin in accordance with the font of the Beis Yosef. So if I'm going to wear a Rabeinu Tam tefillin, they need to be in accordance with the font of the Beis Yosef. Now, those are difficult to come by unless you make them custom made, because the people who wear a Rabeinu Tam tefillin are chassidim, and chassidim wear Rashi use the Arizal ksav. So anyway, the long short story is that the Rebbe arranged for Rabbi Zurkind to write Rabeinu Tam tefillin for Moshe Feinstein, and Rabbi Zurkind, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein had very particular requirements of him, and he says in the interview he wrote that usually when he wrote tefillin, Rabbi Zurkind passed away already, but he was perhaps the senior sefer of Crown Heights and perhaps even the Rebbe's personal sefer. He has a number of grandchildren who live here in Chicago actually, and his custom was that he would write tefillin from beginning to end without any interruption whenever he wrote tefillin. But Moshe Feinstein didn't want him to do that. Moshe Feinstein wanted him every time after he finished writing a paragraph, he should show it to Moshe to inspect it, to make sure it's exactly the way he wants it, with the right ksav and the right spaces, and I don't know what else he was looking for. And he had certain requirements at the bottom of the tefillin, whatever it was. But basically, at the end of the day, he arranged for Rabeinu Tam tefillin to be written according to Moshe's specifications. And this letter that's published in Nidus Moshe is a letter where Moshe Feinstein is thanking the Rebbe for enabling him to do this mitzvah of tefillin in the best possible way, to even do the mitzvah of Rabeinu Tam tefillin. And my understanding is that indeed for the end of his life, so from 1980 till I think he passed in 85, perhaps 86, 85, I think 85, or maybe 86. Also this time of the year, actually, so he passed away on Tanis Esther, I think. So for exactly 5 years, Moshe Feinstein wore those Rabeinu Tam tefillin every day, which were arranged by the Rebbe to be written in according to the specifications of Moshe Feinstein.